we're very pleased to have our speaker tonight. He's going to be talking on the subject of free market universal comprehensive health care. Now I know that topic is, I don't know, why in the world would we want to be talking about health care of all things? I mean, has that been in the news at all? I'm not sure. Anyway, he's going to talk about it and see if the free market has anything to do with it. So anyway, no, seriously, I think it's obviously very timely, and I'm glad that for a change things worked out so that it is around the time when it makes sense to talk about it. We're very, very pleased to have Brock here. I was just saying earlier this evening that I don't know why we didn't have him here years ago, so I've heard of him forever. Sam and I used to sit around talking about Brock, about all the ideas, and I think that I probably have not met anyone who has as many ideas per minute as say Brad Leineweber. You could actually keep up with Brad, I think, in a conversation. I don't know if your heart probably couldn't take it, but he is definitely your proverbial man of ideas. He's a history and economics teacher. I'll just read some of the notes here. His research has been encouraged by Milton Friedman, Jack Kemp, William E. Simon Jr., Arthur Laffer, Karl Hess. He has a background in media. He is one of the founding members of the International Society for Individual Liberty. So I don't know why I didn't see you at a couple of ISO meetings over the years. Just kept missing each other. Future Freedom Conferences and inventory for Free Dominion. And he also pioneered the Phone Voter TV network with none other than Samuel Edward Konkin III. So anyway, time is short, there are a lot of ideas, so without any further ado, please help me welcome Brock Davignon. Brock.
Really honored to be here at this particular group that remembers Karl Hess. I got to meet him once in 1985, the same year that the International Society for Individual Liberty was coming together with Libertarian International. And sort of like a Glombosian, I teach Bali Psi as well. And Karl Hess had come from West Virginia to Denver for a poverty conference. And he wanted to show the other panelists, I suppose, who were all statists of one sort or another, that there were some other ways to solve poverty from individual levels to neighborhoods, if nothing else. And they invited him to speak. And given they thought it was a token conservative, they got themselves a rather avant-garde libertarian. He noted that the lady next to him would have been cheerful in ordering 3 million Cossacks to their death just so something could be equal in the general vicinity around there. And then he said, here's the way I'd do it. And at the time he was living in Georgetown a few years prior, in a part of Washington, D.C. that was predominantly African-American. It was run-down, rented tenements. And he had come into a large quantity of polyvinyl chloride pool mat that people would make backyard pools with. He had no idea what to do with this, so he thought about it. And as he often said, he likes to solve problems for freedom's sake. And so he went to his neighbors and said, you know, our heaters in these buildings don't work, none of the furnaces work, none of the radiators work, the basements are useless. Well, we just pull this junk out of here and line it with this polyvinyl chloride, and we grow catfish. And the people said, sounds good to me. And so everybody set up a schedule to feed the catfish, and the kids fed the catfish. The catfish weren't too good at seeing anything, being raised in the basement. But pretty soon that building had protein, which they didn't have in great supply. They had spare money to spend. It got so that they were doing good. The other houses on the tenements, the townhouses, wanted to do the same thing, and all of their landlords, you know, could care less, whatever you want to do. And so they each did. And pretty soon, some of the early catfish farms in downtown Washington, D.C. were buying the landlords out. and they began fixing up the tenements and created their own gentrified part of Georgetown. The Georgetown University and others took note of this, and they were all astonished to find it was Barry Goldwater's former speechwriter that was behind all this. And then he'd give them what for. And he was always challenging people, like a lot of Poli-Sci people like to do, in using your mind to figure out a way to advance freedom in whatever your workaday life is. For Karl Hess, it was being a welder. Somebody else might be a dentist, or a writer. And so when I saw him do this, I stood up, and I hadn't done much with my research to this point except bug some of the great and powerful like Milton Friedman on what I call percentage as you earn financing, which makes a cute acronym PAYE. Finance, and a word I had to invent for Milton Friedman was finansurance. That's the way you finance risk coverage, like when you're sick or injured, that's when you need the help, and if you can't pay the premiums, you don't get the help. Well, that's kind of silly, and capitalism could do a better job than that. So I kicked this idea out in the context of what Duke and Yale University was doing, which I'll return to in a bit. And Karl Hess was so impressed with it, he stuck his big paw on my shoulder and he says, "You just keep doing what you're doing. What you're working on holds the key to a whole variety of issues for which people are now grateful to the state. They can be grateful either to themselves or to capitalism for." And I said, "Okay, I'll do that." And basically I have been true to that promise, and it's been, I'm sort of like a submarine who works on things, and I surface occasionally and say, "Hello, here's where the most advanced upgrade is," and it's getting pretty good and pretty relevant and pretty necessary now. And there's about 10 concepts that go along with this. And I'm not going to talk to you about insurance being sold across state lines. You've heard all that kind of stuff in the news. What I am going to do is have kind of a fun time from the history of liberty, showing you how these principles of human investments have been pioneered by vast organizations of capitalists and little old ladies and other folks in the past. And the industries that they were part of just kind of died out. Like, not a lot of us are Mountainmen today, but anyway. We're looking at industries that functioned for their time, and there were lessons to be learned from these freedom-seeking souls that we can rehash today, reapply, and modernize, and in fact improve on. And that has been a large challenge. And I'll give you some reference points by people we know as we go along. I met Sam Konkin for the first time. I've heard about him for many years. As he goes bouncing back between New York and California. And he always called himself a bi-coastal person. And Ken Hastings and Howard Hinman, Larry Samuels, a fellow named Ron Fink, my dad, and some others, we were all wanting to create a phone voter television network that would, we had 4 satellites in the sky. We were sandwiched in between NBC, ABC, and a new thing called Ted Turner's gig. And we wanted to play with presidential candidates. And about January 20th, we watched Bush 41 give his State of the Union speech, and they had a deal with CBS to pay for 300,000 phone calls. Press 1 on your touch-tone phone if you agree, press 2 if you disagree. That's all they want to do. They got 27 million phone calls. They crashed 14 Midwestern telephone companies. 14 million of the calls went totally dead as the phone companies crashed. They had, we think of today, computer servers or routers. They didn't have the capacity to merge telephony, television, and what we'd say today, computers at all. So being at that intersection, Sam and I and the group at Athena Graphics said, well, instead of handing things out by paper, let's see what we can do from the skies. At the high ground, you win. Famous old Marine adage. At least until Ronald Reagan told a reporter that our mission is the airport, and last time I heard airports were flat, but sometimes you encounter technical difficulties. But anyway, Sam asked me, he says, "Why should I work with you to do this?" I'm like, "Who the heck are you?" And I thought, gee, how am I going to answer Sam? We all know Sam's a skeptic. And so I said, well, I was in Boston in 1979 in the winter. In fact, I think I was the only tourist in Boston that time. And I came up to a 5-way intersection. And I recognized this brick building, among all the stoplights and everything. There was this little phony balustrade on it. And I said, wait a minute, I remember from old Prince in 3rd grade, that's where the Boston Massacre was. That must be where I'm at. And I looked around for a monument, and all I saw was this little triangle thing with a round bunch of cobblestones on it. Underneath that, I said, that's where it was. And right beyond it, I saw a bicentennial flag, 1976. But remember, this is just about 1980. As Ronald Reagan said, the nearest thing to eternal life is a government bureau. So I said, oh, that looks fun. And I was driving around in a Toyota that had one cell in its battery that was kind of fuzzy. And I knew if I shut this car off with snow this deep, I would have to get it jumped. But it seemed worth the hassle, you know. And here I was on the Freedom Trail, and the Green Dragon Tavern like this was down the street. And I said, okay. So I went on in, and they had a test. 60 questions to fill out. What signer of the Declaration of Independence would your opinions today be most like then? And I looked at the ranger and I said, let me guess, most of America is Tory. And he says, I'm sad to say yes. I said, let me guess, 96%? And he goes, you're off by 1 percentage point. I was afraid of that. And I said, take the test anyway. I said, okay. So I filled it out. You know, I wasn't for subsidies for the East India Tea Company or the modern equivalent. And I just went through this whole thing. And I turned it into the Ranger Flora or Fauna or whatever her name was. And she ran it through their computer. And she starts jumping up and down. And she runs into the ranger's office and drags this guy out. And he looks at the results. He looks at me and says, I want to shake your hand. I'm like, okay. And he says, you are the first Sam Adams we've ever had in 4 years. I told that to Sam Konkin, and he says, I'll work with you. You have credit. So, incorruptible opponent of tyranny, as it said on Faneuil Hall across the way. So he and I brainstormed a bit, and we did what we said we were going to do. In 3 months, we ramped up a nationwide television network. And from the Golombosian era, from when I was 17, C.H. Hoyles, who was the publisher of the Santa Ana Register at that time, trained me, and I was an editor of a paper right old age of 17, being an activist with paper long earlier. We figured out that you could have millions of thin cats instead of a few fat cats, and they could give you contributions. And if you got them mad enough to call up on the telephone, whether they agreed with Bush or not, or panelist A, B, C, D, and E, and none of the above, because we're libertarians, right? They're all clowns. We would have different shows, Milan Brothers and Sisters, Liberty Rings, and we worked with Amiga toaster technology at the time, and we created graphics to instruct an audience who had never picked up a phone to a television show before to do this. And we began to separate issues out into legal and moral points of view. And the Peronistas called us up, and every day we were faxing them these things, and they were climbing up in the polls fantastically from like, you know, nowhere to, you know, then 20 and 28% and so forth. There's this unknown Arkansas governor whose wife was lying about his sexual pet bills, and they only had $50,000, and they could not afford the $150,000 a month it was going to cost for a democracy channel. The Republicans, we pitched a Republican channel, the Republican channel, and the grassroots channel for all of us other weirdos like libertarians. And Marcus and Greer, his media consultants, were looking at the stuff that we had similarly sent to the Peronistas, and they said, this is great stuff, but we just don't have the money for this. I said, couldn't you afford one show? We haven't even got down. I said, oh, come on, you Democrats got more money than the Republicans always do. Who are you fooling? He said, no, seriously, we just got $50,000. I said, that's it? And they go, yeah. And I said, well, here's what you do. There's one satellite uplink truck left in America. It's $35,000 for the month. Take the other 15 grand, and you phone, fax, and whatever else you can do on this new DARPANet thing, and manage to get it to spot TV producers and to network producers that you've got free sound bites raining down from the sky of your guy. And my techies have had Clinton in their studio, and they tell me he doesn't need a host to interview it. He is the host. It's the Bill Clinton show. And so Sam was thinking there, he's leaning up one day and he looks at me and he says, you know, we could make this guy president. We just created the Bill Clinton Roadshow. I said, send the facts. And we did. A little Athena Graphics logo on it, and Palace Productions we called it, and the Phone Butter Television Network. And as Clinton say, the rest is history. At the same time, Clinton never paid me a dang dime, neither did Perot. So Sam was getting a little bothered by this, and he says, well, let's work with these other guys and we'll show them what for with their competition. So we picked up on Buchanan and Jerry Brown. And we backed up his 800 number thing. We were working with 700 numbers, 900 numbers at the time, we're all new. And we created capital calling cards with a telephony guy where you could buy your opinion to your Congress peer that actually would cross-index your zip code and your telephone number and it would be sent out to your guy to let him know what you think. Well, Sam said, you know, this percentages you earn financing stuff you've got just blows them out of the water. Let's use that. And so I said, well, Brown's a Democrat. He's not likely to go this. Yeah, but he's a flat taxer. Yeah, even if he stair steps it for the poor, middle class, and the rich, you know, he's got the idea, eliminate the whole tax code. So I said, okay, let me think on this. So I came up with a sight gag, something funny. So I had Jerry Brown. Behind him is the whole federal tax code, volume after volume of it, shelves of it. And the idea was he was standing there and it would recede in the background in the back of a trash truck as he's standing there holding up his postcard. This is how you fill out your new IRS tax form. You multiply by 0.10 and that's what you send in. He couldn't find a trash truck in New York. We're going back and forth. And I said, well, just go to the library and check out the whole code from the New York Public Libraries. Got a good plaza, you can do it, and I'll try to arrange some media. With 13 television network crews and ours there, and he's slowly throwing one tax volume into the bin after the other as he's holding up his postcard. And he was doing this for like 2 hours. I mean, everybody in the news got it. That little bit of videotape pushed him up in the June primaries in New York and California 10 points in 1 week. He came within 2 points of taking it away from Clinton. So I began to think with Sam, let's think big here. Let's take our ideas and see what we done with it. And I had started on this process as a communications major in college some years ago, but I went into communications because I had something to communicate. I was interested in free market economics and liberty and so on. And I thought tonight, I said, I got to start this audience off in some way. Karl Hess, if he was standing here, what would he have done to jazz this audience in some simple minder bender way? And I was holding my hands up like this and I go, that's it, liberty. Did everybody do that? There you go. I'm going to use your right hand. It looks funny with the left. There you go. So do you see somebody with a libertarian bumper sticker in their car, just go. And you can start it. It starts right here, right now. This is the first time this has ever been done. So we'll see how far Karl's idea would go. And he encouraged me to do this from the grassroots level as well as media. Take your ideas and do something with them, even if they're half-baked. But I'm kind of a neo-perfectionist like my daughter. I'm going to get it better and better, and then I'll let the world know about it. And so what I'd like to do is cover 10 points on how we can achieve universal comprehensive health care, not as a right, not as a privilege, but as Karl Hess would say, an achievement in the free market that everybody can have what they need or want. Okay? And so I'd like to do that in a few fun ways here. I'm going to kind of role play a little bit with some of us. And the first thing I'd like to do is talk about the principle of early American immigration. Okay? Now, the early immigrants to America were first either slaves or indentured servants. They were not very efficient. Indentured servants in particular were very slothful. They promised 100% of their labor for 7 years. Now, would you like to wake up every morning and think, oh, good, I get to work 16 hours for somebody else and get nothing for it? But I did get a nice trip across the ocean and a little grub steak here in the winter and a roof over my head. You know, that's cool, but, you know, it doesn't motivate you greatly. So the Virginia Company of Adventurers got nationalized, and their 6,000 of the first 7,000 colonists died from malaria, but the Crown thought this was mismanagement of an extraordinary level, and all the capitals went north. And just about that time, they had a little court case. If you ever stood at Jamestown, there's a little tiny room, not much bigger than this booth, and an indentured servant wanted out of his contract, and the guy wanted to get him out of the contract, but he wanted some money back. So he said to the Virginia Company of Adventurers, and the word adventurer means those who believed in the advent of a new age, and they ventured their capital. And then they later followed their money across the ocean, where we get the word adventurer today. Okay. Now, he says, well, I'm going to sue the Virginia Company. The Virginia Company says, hey, wait a minute, all we did was just get the guy here. You know, it's not our problem, you know. We got our money, and we did our job, and we're not at fault here. And if he changed his mind and you changed your mind, that's your problem. So the wise old judge, who'd been an indentured servant himself, said, how would you like to pay 10% of your income as a free woman? So whether you become a tailor or a farmer, whatever you do with your life in the next 10 years, you're going to owe this fellow, you got owe still a year or two. Does that be a good deal for you? And she says yes. And he said yes, and they shook hands. Well, that little precedent that happened caused the entire New England, New France area, Davignon is my name, and New Holland to do what? They got rid of indentured servitude in 20 years. Slavery did not appear in the North anywhere, down to 2 or 3% maybe. But by and large, it disappeared. And people started working on percentage as you earn, percentage of income contracts. And I had to blow the dust off of 375-year-old documents in order to establish this to myself. And I began to see a pattern here. Here are goods bound for England on a dock, and here are goods that are just sent to England, and they're both by the same person. What's going on here? And I realized it was a percentage from year to year. Good crops, bad crops, you chopped down a lot of trees, you had an accident, you broke your leg, you know, you didn't make so many trees you sent. Whatever the thing was, there was always a percentage going on. And I realized, if you looked at various other immigrant groups, the Mormon Perpetual Immigration Fund, you'd pay an equivalent of a tithing back into it, and you'd bring your neighbors and friends from England or Scandinavia. You know, these kinds of things happened in early America. Well, that kind of got me going. And so by 1979, I hopped in my beat-up Toyota, and I went to see William E. Simon Sr., who was the former Secretary of Treasury and former Energy Czar, and he was then working for Booz Allen and Hamilton Management Consultants right there on 5th Avenue. And I went up there, and he had read my proposal versus Teddy Kennedy called the CompreHealth Care Corporation, which I got a kick out of making the CCC. And he had read it on January the 1st. He's not much of a football fan. And he told his secretary, I want to see this kid. It's the greatest thing since Godmother and Apple Pie I've ever heard of. Now that's a pretty good endorsement. So I hopped in my car and I drove from the Rocky Mountains to New York. I got a new suit, a nice briefcase, and went on in there. And he redirected me to a fellow named Reynolds, who was in charge of 11 medical empires in the New York area. And he says, we advise these people, and I have a question for you. How do you pay doctors who have different egos, work different hours, maybe you're really interested in what they do or they like golfing a lot? How are you going to pay people on a medical empire that's basically supported by percentage of income for both preventative care as well as medical care that's curative? And he realized right off the bat that I was the first person to come up with a first economic incentive for preventative care. It's in the doctor's self-interest to get you out there working again if you fell off an I-beam and patch up your leg, right? So you can go out there and earn money, he gets his percentage. He's still getting a percentage of 0, but if he gets 12% of your income, he's got every reason to not only give you long lasting care, but as quick as he can with the best technology. So head to toe, comprehensive health care. Teddy Kennedy, meanwhile, is saying things like CAT scans are too expensive and we'd never have these in a government program, you know. And last month my wife had gotten a scan and found a kidney cancer at a very early stage, and the doctors asked her, how did you find this thing? Well, I just did a health checkup. Good technology. So, you know, at that time I took issue with him, and my brother-in-law wound up selling MRI machines all over Asia. This Tuesday it must be Beijing. And as I kept my hand on the pulse here, Teddy Kennedy got defeated. But in doing so, I had a clue on how to answer Simon's question, Reynolds' question. So I turned to history again. And what I did next was kind of interesting. I looked at death-dealing privateers. Okay. Now, the whole process of privateers is such that you may not know this as libertarians because you probably read it out of history out of a government textbook. There were 792 investor-owned, privately armed warships that set sail against the British. They captured over 3,100 Empire vessels. At the same time, there were 64 continental government and state government-supported ships. In fact, the first one that set sail was April 15, 1775, 4 days before the Battle of the Concord Bridge. It was called the Tyrannicide. Nice name. It was captained by Jonathan Harridan, who was a rope maker. So he dealt with hemp ropes and so forth. They'd stand there talking, making these big, long 100-foot ropes back and forth. Good ideas generated. You know, I can't make time to deal with other things. And he captured over 1,000 British cannon all by his little old self in a 16-gun ship. He invented the pendulum. So when you're doing this on the ocean, it's kind of hard. Your guns are aiming up at the sky. So when the pendulum swings, he yells fire, you fire, you're at level broadside. Okay? Those kinds of innovations, the Jackass brig, a big giant air rudder on the back, there are only 3 ships like that in the Revolution. I learned all this trivia trying to answer Simon's question, how do you pay doctors? And here's the answer. On a ship, the greedy capitalists only wanted 33% for a privateer, the government wanted 50%. So John Paul Jones lamented, oh, we can never outfit a Navy ship whenever there's a privateer in the harbor doing the same thing. All the talent went to the free market. Well, the captain would take that 2/3, the government or the capitalists, in this case the capitalists got a third, these are little ladies with gold pieces, go get them boys, okay. And there were a couple of lady privateer captains too, by the way. But of the 2/3, it was split into 20ths. The captain's purse had a 20th just for rewarding merit pay. The Marines in the fighting tops that would shoot the enemy captain or fired when the captain yelled fire when the pendulum swung, you know, this kind of thing. The captain had a 20th for himself. The first, second mates they could decide, do you want 2 mates here or 3 to divide this 1/20th? Can the 2 of you guys do 12-hour watches? You want to split it into 8 hours each. Same 20th is what you're going to get. So I was, yeah, I could handle, you know, splitting it 3 ways. Let's do it that way. You know, I don't want to get too tired of doing this for months. Okay, fine. And it went all the way down to little cabin boys. You have 7 cabin boys who are going to split 1/8 of a 20th of 2/3. They knew their percentages, let me tell you. A cabin boy would come back from a cruise capturing British merchant vessels and occasionally a ship of the line and hand the guns to George Washington, the equivalent of a middle-class man's income. Okay. So, when the War for Free Trade and Sailors' Rights came around, and we had virtually no Navy because Thomas Jefferson was sort of a pacifist and got rid of the stuff, and decides to take on the world's biggest military and naval power on earth, the privateers went to sea again. New England, they weren't too popular in this time, but there were 517 privateers and 23 government ships. Much like the Revolution at war's end, only 3 of the government ships were left operable, with burn, sink, and destroy as orders, where the privateers were capture, trade prisoners, and be kind as much as possible with a sword. Okay. And that's what they did. And most of the prisoner exchanges, both in Europe and in America, came from privateerships, not from government ships, because basically nobody was left alive. So the humanity of what was going on with the profit motive was more evident. And I began to see this percentage functioning going on. So I decided that I was going to look into history a little further. And I found out that some other folks used this, and they were called Mountainmen. Let me put on my lunatic fringe here. And basically, the Mountainmen would meet at a rendezvous 1,000 miles from where they started, sometimes further, 1,500. And you're going to meet somebody on such and such a date on a certain river fork, and they better be there with your traps, your gunpowder, some muskets, and some trinkets for the locals, or you're in a world of hurt. And they would put their furs as essentially cash on the barrel, C-A-C-H-E, cash on the barrel, and the trader would evaluate this. Etienne Provost, Jim Bridger, a whole variety of these people, Rocky Mountain Fur Company, Hudson Bay Company, New France, New England, spread all the way to the Rockies in California. They set the market rate right then and there at the rendezvous, meet you in French. And it was not in their self-interest to hide a fur over here or bury it still somewhere, because the best market price they could get was right there. Why? Because they were going to pay percentage of income for those traps, gunpowder, and muskets. And the more you put on the table, the more you kept, and the trader was happy with his percentage, which sometimes was around 17% for himself. And much like the people in early America bound for England on a contract, the rest got shipped as well for yourself. And that money was put in the bank in St. Louis somewhere. Well, once I began to realize that most of America seemed to be existing because of percentages you earn in finance, and my little twist on it was Finansurance, I said, I'm doing pretty good as a historian and as an economist here, and I decided to be a teacher somewhere along the line to see what the kids could give me as feedback. Notice there's not a whole lot of teenagers in here, and there ought to be, okay? That's our fault. We were all once teenagers at some libertarian like Robert Lefebvre or Columbus or somebody in a Wally Sci 50 class taught. And we need to do that. So that's a form of human investment. Would you like to get paid for teaching liberty to young people? Okay. So I was looking further. And when I was a teenager, Bob Poole invited me in 1971 to meet him. And he had written an article that talked about how you could do the separation of education and state. And he used two examples that in 1970 had started. And in 1970, Duke University and Yale University created these kind of people. Ancient Robo-Pagan priesthood? No, it's graduation gown. And in the process of doing this, a kid from rat hole poverty, for 0.3% of their annual postgraduate income, could go to an Ivy League college. And at Yale University, in the Yale Law School, another 1,000 or so did. There's 2,600 of these students. There was a young kid named Bill Clinton going there who had to borrow $500 because he just didn't have a lot of backing in Arkansas for being there. And so he borrowed $500 and he promised that he would pay 0.35, 35/100ths of 1% for every $1,000 he borrowed. So half that number, he didn't borrow 1,000, he only needed 500. That was good enough for him to get him by. He was a good Arkansas poor boy. He would scrimp and save and stretch his peanut butter, and he did. And he graduated from Yale Law School. So when he graduated, he got this great job in politics right off the bat, and he was making money. And he said, why should I pay these people about, 1.5% or so for the next 15, 20 years when I could offer them money right now and buy my contract back? What if I just offer them $500 plus a little bit, like it would be figured on an amortization table? So we offered them the money, they bought it back. Bill Clinton created as a kid the first career futures exchange place in capitalism for human investments, and the guy doesn't know this. Not that he doesn't know me a favor and I can't pick up the phone and tell him what a wonderful thing he did as a kid, but we'll get to that later. Think about it for a minute. In that big health bill that Mr. Obama did, at the same time they nationalized all student loans, didn't they? Little minor fine print there. Did the banks really care? No, not too badly. Anytime a kid defaulted for over 90 days to 6 months, they would immediately hit the government the next day with done letters. See, I approved it. I sent the kid 7 letters. Kids move around, they don't get them. I want 7% out of the federal government instead of the 3% the kid was going to give me. So they've been scamming the government on this for years and wrecking kids' credit for years. And a guy like Obama just says, well, I'm tired of that, and I'm an honest guy, he says, so I'm just going to do National Socialism, seek out him. So he did. And he snuck that past everybody, and that's probably as much or more significant than the 10% more of health care that he ordered as a form of fascism, which is basically, according to Mussolini's book, page 1, is government-directed business for the glory of the state. Okay. So, the next lesson I learned out of this situation was that you can have a product that's not repossessable. Can anybody repossess your education? Can anybody repossess your health care? Another big ticket item. Can anybody really repossess your house? All that really happens there is you lose everything that you put into it. So if I'm going to sit here and I say, I'm not going to buy a house, that's crazy. Let me put on my Century 21 jacket here. I have 18 credits in real estate law. And I say to myself, gee, maybe we can solve the whole housing crisis right now, right here. The crisis isn't a housing crisis. It's a rigid, fixed payments crisis. To quote something like William Jennings Bryan, you will not crucify us on an amortization table looking at a crystal ball that's cracked. Has anybody here ever gotten sick or injured or pregnant or lost a job? Bad things happen to good people who would like to keep their word. And can you look into this crystal ball and say, on February the 2nd of the year 2017, I will pay my housing mortgage company $2,282.52. That's not rational. And we're a bunch of rationalists here. Rational objectivism, some of us are older enough to remember that. Okay? Fixed payments on a rigid schedule are insane for big ticket items. You want to know who invented installment payments? A guy named Isaac Singer. For what? A little sewing machine. 12 easy payments. You can do that on the Frontier a Sears catalog or a J.C. Penney's or Montgomery Ward's catalog. That's legit. It's a short-term cost. In fact, if I'm a tailor, I can buy the machine. But for a 4-year major university college education, for health care, my wife just had $20,000 worth of scans done on her. Is that in the family budget, on the food budget? I don't think so. I'm gambling on insurance, but I have to finance that insurance, and what's a way I can do that if I'm a little bit hurt? Or the breadwinner's down? It ain't gonna happen. And so what's happened is the socialists have moved in, and the fascists have moved in on all of these bleeding heart issues. So the housing bill, the education bill, the Obamacare bill, we're sitting here as volitional scientists scratching our heads and going, how come all this is happening? This isn't the way the future was supposed to be. Is America any better than Nazi Germany in 1933 or Italy in 1922 at the moment? I don't think so. But there's enough of us, maybe 2 to 4% of the population, that's self-aware, so there's no media, others have other walks of life, so we could try something else. Anybody know a farmer? Willie Nelson said, how come I'm still doing Farm Aid concerts 25 years later? He lost his own farm to the IRS. The government farms out in a fascist style to private companies rigid fixed installment payments for crop insurance. That means if it hails and it wipes out your crop and it's flat, you're not going to make any money there. But you paid the small amount of a fixed payment that wasn't so small because you could have bought a tractor with that amount. Maybe you're covered, maybe you're not. The government says you are, and politicians get to look at it, but does it really happen? Could we take over that market? Sure. Can we take over the healthcare market? Sure. Can we do the separation of higher education and state? Sure. It takes us 11 years. We can privatize every UC in California. How's that for a budget cutting item? Now, about the year 2003, I got a D in a class, in a social work class, from a professor that just hated everything I was saying because it didn't make the government and stealing children from people who are poor, which was her thing, too happy. And so I did a report on percentage as you earn restitution to victims of crime from criminals. And keep in mind that only 2 out of 6 categories of criminals are violent crimes. The other 4 were they stole something, they burgled something, drug crimes, whatever.
Well, hopefully disobeyed the government.
That's true.
At all.
True. So if we put these people out on the streets as out-victs, and you have an educator, a guy with a gun as a parole or probation officer, a psychologist, and you just swamp them with all the goodwill that you can with a little bit of human investment finance to see what this guy was missing that made him harm people or was so desperate to do so, or just kind of has an empty wisdom barrel even though they're very smart, which is the way I meet a lot of kids in lockdown prison high schools that I teach. And they'll tell you this. And you have human warehouses in California that are costing us $6 billion, which is about the same as the public school budget. Could you not put these people out on the street? Now, 69% of people who commit misdemeanors and felonies, employers will not hire. But would you as an employer be more likely to hire somebody if you knew that 17% of their income was going to go to their victim of crime? Or several victims of crime, as the case may be. Well, I was going to write this new guy who was emerging politically, Schwarzenegger, and she says, well, if you write Jerry Brown an equivalent letter, I'll do it. I just grinned like a Cheshire cat. I said, yeah, I know Jerry. So I sent it to both of them. 6 weeks later, they met in Los Angeles to discuss it. And a deal was done. If Brown ran for Attorney General, Schwarzenegger would not talk up the Republican too bad. He wanted judges to judge, not this 3-strike stuff. He wanted to start doing this. And Schwarzenegger was going to do the other. Didn't happen. Schwarzenegger came back several times through back channel and said, gee, the people have got to start this at the grassroots. And if the mob goes in a certain direction, I can get in front of it and lead it. Okay, that's one style of doing things, you know.
That's Clinton saying, make me.
Yes, exactly. And so we're stuck, back to square one than we were the first day of his administration. And we're back to our media strategies. We're back to convincing people by education, offering scholarships to train a new generation. So, the next thing that happens is this. Howard Hinman got me interested a number of years ago as I was watching asteroids near misses, and we created a private property concept of 6% property rights to title for an asteroid that you discover. You get 3% for co-discovery if you corroborate his find. You'll get 3% for assaying it by a nice spectroscope to see if it's got lots of gold and platinum and rare earths like cobalt on it, which they all do. Not to mention half steel. You'll get 9% for putting a little waistband around it as a beacon, so we have a permanent beep, beep, beep off of it. You'll get another 15% for taking the responsibility of re-navigating this thing, because it's a little too close to Earth, which is sometimes helpful for shipping purposes, but otherwise it's not a good idea. And the other half can go for mining or habitat, depending on what the rock is made out of. And one of the people you'll see at this club, I hope, is a fellow named Steve Cervantes, who's a merchant banker, and he's a collateral specialist. And he had a price on asteroids for a mine playing really hard to get at 1/10,000th of a penny. And then he upped it to 1/10,000th of a dollar when 2 asteroids were landed on and 1 comet was hit. Proved we could get there. Still mining hard to get, but it's not worth nothing. So I asked one of my students, how many California colleges and schools have found asteroids, and what would they be worth? At that rate, 6%, property rights, title. Get your telescopes, folks. And at that discount rate, that severe discount, California right now has $1.9 trillion worth of collateralizable rocks in the sky. Would you rather hawk those, or would you rather commit the ability of the state to tax you? Let's go for the rocks. The Russians have got 900. Most of our allies seem to have a few thousand here and there. But they've recently, California, we've automated our asteroid hunting ability, and we've now racked up another couple 100,000. Could we get the California congressional delegation, maybe in our own self-interest, to do something? There's about 8 other states that would benefit greatly, not to mention the Air Force and the Naval Observatory. Run by 2 ladies. The greatest asteroid hunter is Eleanor Helene, and the other is the greatest comet hunter, Dr. Carolyn Shoemaker. Between them, they've each discovered by eyeball about 1,000 each, and Helene automated, scrounging together JPL money for years, created the 45-inch ocean telescope with what they call a CCD chip that digitizes everything, and then computers and kids in high schools can look at the photos and compare streaks of light versus no streaks of light and say, I think I found something here, Teach. So, we're back to privateering in space. Now here's another kicker for us libertarians. Remember when this movement started, we all talked about death and taxes, and for those of our Heinlein fans back there, Ron Robleski is a physicist you might meet, and cousin of mine. He and I were walking out of the Sequoia forest, and we just about got killed by a bus that went around a corner as we were discussing creating the Young Sequoia Club, because I'd like to live as long as a sequoia tree at least. I'd like to get my gray hair change colors and a few wrinkles less, get some hair back here, feel otherwise pretty good, like I would be at age 30. And we started looking around for other people that were interested in this. We found a lot of Heinlein fans, and I think this particular club would do well with that in mind. There's now a Methuselah Foundation, the 250 Club. There's a variety of longevity, quality of life outfits. But especially interesting is up at Stanford, the BioX program. They got $3 million that students and professors can research genetic projects that the pharmaceutical companies have no interest in, and they don't do what the farm people want. And the kids have found out, or after they cracked the human genome, not to mention frogs and mosquitoes and everything else back in the year 2000, they've cracked 17 diseases into our genome since. And they got bored. Good Silicon Valley kids, lots of computer power, got great gene separators. Let's crack the super gene on aging. You filled up this room with marbles that all has a magnetic attraction one to another. That's about how complex that gene is that they got to unravel. And they just figured out 2 new algorithms to make that possible just this past month. So if you're dying and you're in pain in your hospital bed, hang in there for about 5 years, because nobody's going to die after that. And all of a sudden you now have a problem of Earth's resources. Gee, there's only 200 million asteroids out there. Everybody leave and turn Earth into a park for the make the greenies happy. Nature Conservancy will buy it. Small piece of real estate. how are you going to pay for your booster spice? Will you still get pregnant when you're 1,000 years old? Yes. Will you still fall off of an I-beam in space? Yes. You're going to lose your job as an asteroid miner sometime? I guess. You're going to pay for your booster spice as a percentage of income. And if you don't like the round ball on the end of your French nose or something, and you want to do cosmetic surgery, okay, we'll add to the 12% an average American pays now. Although I really believe that competition in the free market would drive the comprehensive care price down to about 8%. And as wellness kicks in, probably at least that. But you will add a percent to fix your nose and whatever else you want to nip and tuck. And if you're a young kid and all these baby boomers say, we want to force you, kid, to pay for our medical care now, so we're going to take it out of your hide in your productive years and your young years, and the kid's going, you just put me $300,000 in debt this past year with the politicians. I can't afford that. Okay, don't force them. But when they get hurt and their car wrecked from drinking too much or something, we're just going to charge them more than 12% to make up for all the years they scaced out on us. We got them now, because they need their body put back together again. Now, interesting thing that I found out about 1980, I interviewed an aunt of mine. She was 96 years old at the time, and she'd been a nurse for a horse and buggy doctor. The other night I was watching Bill Mayer make fun of a lady who called up and said, you know, doctors used to accept chickens for medical care. And he just raked her over the coals, like how stupid barter for medical care in our modern world. And technically he's right, but he's also very, very wrong, because this is the way it worked. My aunt was sharp as a tack, and she says to me, you ever ask yourself what that horse and buggy was used for? And, well, it's not big enough to be an ambulance, is it? No, we did house calls. What was it for? Carry his bag? Have a soft ride on his butt? What? No. Think. It was for carrying melons and chickens and apple pies as payment. Money payment. He says, you use the fancy word econometric. The econometric unit was a chicken. And we knew what the price of the county fair was. The doctor knew what his basic produce in the economy was. He knew what his fancy new x-ray machine for broken legs was going to cost. Let's say you broke a leg and you're a poor farmer helping a rich farmer do his fence here. And both of you broke your leg, the log fell on both of you. Well, I come up to your chicken coop and I say, I reckon, as in reconnaissance, that'll be 2 chickens from you. I go over to your farm. I reckon that'll be 25 chickens from you. Is that the same price? Bet it is. It's a percentage. That's the real value of the medical care to him and me as the doctor. And him and me as the doctor. An econometrically leveled playing field. And sell it to bright and funny folks. But the idea is, and she explained it to me, that when hospitals and insurance companies in the 1920s, which she remembered coming into existence, did so, they used these stupid fixed payments that were brittle and left all the poor people out of the economy right then and there. There went their health care. We're going to set up mortgage companies to have installment payments for this house. Are you going to buy that house in 5 years if you know you might bust a leg? Or something bad could happen and it might be bad enough to last 3 to 6 months, and the $100,000 you put into that house is going to go... Somebody else has got your money? And that was paying interest? Well, you can figure interest, principal, time value of money, and anything else you want to throw in there like insurance on loan in case you do get killed, as a percentage. It's not hard, and you multiply 0.12 times your income and you got everything covered from hangnails to neurosurgery. Anybody here want to start a company? That's our challenge. That's what we got to do. We got to set up a career futures exchange. Human investments of all kinds. In 11 years, nobody will be waving flags at colleges that say go state, because there won't be any more state colleges. The professors had their academic freedom. They formed a co-op and they bought their place. And the students and the alumni did. Well, by the way, those Duke and Yale experiments, they had contracts for 15 years for the medical surgery school, 20 years for business people, and 30 years for artists. And their Fortran programs, of which I have copies, specified that women were only going to be 10% of the workforce 30 years from now, in 1970. Did they make money off all the ladies they got in there? You bet they did. Did they make money off of all the computer graphics people? You bet they did, more than the surgeons even. So the long haul, even if you make mistakes, it turns out profitable. And church-supported universities like BYU, they have a nursing school there. There's a nursing shortage. The LDS Church pays half of their percentage.
This thing's flashing a yellow square.
Okay.
Probably about to run out of tape maybe.
That could be.
Yep.
I haven't had any tape. Be prepared. Let's see what's in here. There we go. And the whole idea
No, it's
of...
okay. You haven't run out yet.
Okay. If you want to just change it up there.
Yeah.
The whole idea of students, patients, pre-patients, all the lessons learned from history where you can pay ahead of time, present, a percentage of your income, and after the fact, post-payment. P-A-Y-E-M-E-N-T. Throw that E in there. Percentage as you earn it. Okay? That's at the 1990 World Libertarian Convention with Howard Hinman, and we gave a Lifetime Achievement Award to Milton Friedman for his pioneering work in human achievements and human investments. And it was printed on the back of Free Market Yellow Pages paper as an ad, essentially, to everybody at the convention. That's how we paid for it. He said, I've received many awards in my life, but this one on yellow paper here, I'm most proud of. I went to Stanford Library and I went through all of his correspondence talking about educational opportunity banks with Lyndon Baines Johnson type socialists, Professor Gerald Zacharias at MIT, and other correspondence. And their reactions to the fierce outcry of the socialist, redistributionist left attacking what was going to be a government educational opportunity bank, with all the right words on it too. They saw immediately conceptually what this would do. It would take the gratitude away from the state and put it where it rightly belongs in people making handshakes. Yeah, I want to go to this college. Yes, I would like you as my doctor. Yes, I'd like to pay for this house for the next 30 years, and I'm not going to be thrown out on my ear in case something bad happens to me. Did I just lay out a battle plan for victory or what? Karl Hess thought so. Hope you do. And the only thing I can say is, as far as action and foundations, for years I've operated a sort of a brain trust called the Innovatory for Freedominium, and we wanted to change that to Freedom Axiom. We'll play on Roman words and so forth. A word that doesn't really exist, but we can have the Freedominium or Freedom Axiom of America, maybe on an asteroid, maybe on the oceans, maybe right here. But we have to decide that we're going to do this ourselves, each in our own walk of life. And that's why I wasn't going to bore you with just a medical talk as if you were all doctors and all financiers, because we're not. And we all know teenagers that can be anything. My 12-year-old daughter, I hope, decides to spend some of her time in genetics, some of it in advertising, some of it in various other ways, so she can sell ideas of freedom and good products that help save lives and so forth. But as she gets paid, she'll be being paid from both the poor people, the middle-class people, and occasionally the rich. And the rich may decide it's going to get very expensive. They have to pay their personal doctor tens of millions of dollars, not millions, because that same doctor can make a lot more from the general mix of population. So think about that. And basically, that's the challenge that Karl Hess had for all of us. Whatever your walk of life is, whether you're a welder or writer, whatever you are, act. Do something. If you hear a good idea, stick it at your table. Talk about it. Who knows who you'll talk to? Who knows who you'll influence? Maybe you won't make that few $1 billion from replacing Blue Cross, or maybe you can get the CEO of Blue Cross across the table. Maybe you talk to Kaiser and when he doesn't pay you the least bit a month. And if Kaiser, walk and start your own medical empire. That's what Booz Allen and Hamilton suggested a long time ago. So I'm kind of getting back into surfacing here as a submarine, and I hope that the Concord Healthcare Corporation perspective is worthwhile, and some other prospectuses have that. And so at this point in time, Mike says, throw it open to the genius that's here. If you have any questions, I can always put on a hat and answer it right away. So I'll give it a go. Because the conservatives don't have that many good ideas. The liberals don't have that many good ideas. We have all the good principles and the good ideas. So I'm really delighted to hear you giving scholarships to people to check things out. When I was 17 years old, Spencer McCallum and an engineer in San Pedro named Al Loai talked with me, and we talked about percentages you earn financing of little ice boats they had figured out for the Mexican people and the fishermen. 7% of all the world gets its food off of the oceans, are pretty close to the shore. And in Mexico, an ice boat would go out to sea after waiting 3 days for ice. It's going to melt in 3 days, gets to the fishing grounds. Maybe they catch fish, maybe they don't. Whatever they catch, the ice will last long enough to come back to the cannery. I live near Monterey Bay and Cannery Row, so I know how this works that way. But in Mexico, if they didn't catch anything, they got to wait another 3 days in line. The bars and the brothels and whatever else the fishermen will do. And it's unfortunate that this massive, discouraging waste of time and lifetime and the way they spend it was there. And Spencer McCallum is an anthropologist. He says it's a terrible way people spend their time. It's not family-oriented, it's not nice, it's subsistence living. And he says, I can't figure out why they can't buy my boat. And I looked at Al Loai and I looked at him and I said, have you ever heard of percentages you earn financing? I read this really neat article in Reason Magazine. And it dawned on them that that might be the way to do it. Their project had folded and they moved on to other things at that time, but the principle still stuck in Al Loai's mind. I called him up, and Howard keeps track of Spencer McCallum. And frankly, if you can set up a trade cycle with a Rutan waterproof cargo plane to a fishing spot in Mexico or the Philippines, and you can send strawberries and almonds from California back, you've created yourself a trade cycle and you're making money. And teenagers can do it. They can even fly planes. There's a scholarship. Yes?
Okay, let me ask the obvious critiques if somebody should air them. Under this percentage system, what's to stop, on one hand, what's to stop everybody from just pretending they're poor so they have to pay less? And on the other hand, say people don't pretend, what's to stop doctors from saying, okay, I'm only going to treat the rich people because I'm going to get more money for my 12%. Or say, I'll treat them both, but I'm going to give a lesser grade of treatment to the guy with the lesser income because I'm getting less from him, and I'm going to give better treatment to the guy who's earning more.
Okay. Remember Duke and Yale? They went back and they did a study using IRS 1040 forms to see what they would reported as their income to the Alumni Association that had capitalized their college education. And what they were finding was the graduates were paying a full percentage on their gross income at a level higher than they reported to the IRS. Furthermore, 3 students decided they wanted to opt out. And then in the contract it said you can switch from percentages you earn back to that bad old installment payment method. And here's the amortization table. One kid was a surgeon as a graduate, and he looked at that and goes, my gosh, I owe you $40,000 back amortization. He said, yeah, our system allowed your income to ramp up to where now you have it, but just out of college you couldn't have made those payments, could you? And he goes, no, my family was poor, we couldn't do it. So, in answer to your second question, Remember the fellow here who has a market rate set? Everybody comes to the rendezvous. It's not just the rich people who'll be coming to that doctor. It's the middle class and the poor people too. And if the doctor is so short-sighted that he's going to try to set his market rate with the rich people, these people's, the middle class and the poor people's demand for health care will go up percentage-wise, where it's more attractive for him to start accepting than middle-class people. And gee, he could even afford to help some poor ones. If you're going to set up a percentage as you were in finance or insurance company, no, you can't take in all of Mexico at one time. But you can take 3 of these and 4 of those and 1 of those. One being the rich one. There's not that many of them. So you're dealing with a market pressure that it's cash on the barrel. The market rate for a guy just trying to do the rich people will be so astronomically high for those rich people to pay them versus if they just joined a co-op. Up around Washington area, Washington Pacific, as opposed to Washington State. Libertarians should start saying Washington Pacific, right? Almost all of the hospitals and all medical care up there is owned by a co-op of people in those areas. And it's fostered by Washington law, among other things. But they're not nonprofit hospitals and they're not private or church hospitals. They're cooperative private property hospital empires. And all you got to do is throw out your green card, and it doesn't matter what you need. It's green and white, like everything else in Washington is evergreen. You get anything you need as far as medicine, whatever you want. Does that create a demand, whatever you want? No, people learn that they can get a little too much medicine, a little too much medical care, and they learn to take it easy after an initial wahoo back in the early 70s. But that is another good model for how you can grab hold of healthcare. You can ask any doctor, what do you know about apricot pits, or what do you know about nutrition or colloidal minerals, that gets my body feeling like a well-tuned Lamborghini, and they will all tell you, I don't know a thing. Whether they do or not, because of trial lawyers' liability on you. An interesting thing, I think, as a side effect of percentages you earn Finansurance is, it causes preventative health care to be in the self-interest of the medical empire. So now your doctor is going to say, oh yeah, I know all about that. It's $20, go down to the health food store and buy it. And, if you need this and this as far as a prescription to cure the thing, this will help you heal. Cool. Get what you need, whether it's curative or preventative. So if you think that Freddie the freeloader is going to be like, I'm going to kick back and not work as hard or something, what he's doing on all those other things besides his housing, education, and medical care, is that the only thing in life he's going to be happy to do? To shrink down? No, he's going to miss out on a lot of other things he could have by working a little harder that doesn't go to somebody for a percentage. He can take his kids on vacations, or he can buy a better car. And if you think about Mexico for a minute with Spencer McCallum, they'd say, hey, I'm a fisherman, but I'd really like to get out of all that mist. I think I'll buy myself a truck, and I'll haul the fish up out of the mountains, and I'll get the people in the mountains with the corn and the maize, and I'll bring it down to the seacoast, and I'll set up a trade cycle that way, and I will pay Ford Motor Company, who's kind of hurting these days, so's General Motors, and gee, what they call it, Chrysler and American Motors. Would you like to set up an auto finance company where I pay you 7% of my income for the next 5 years for my automobile? Not to mention the Finansurance in case I wreck it up. Do you think that would make Detroit hum again?
Well, how do they know you're being truthful with what you're making?
Aha! Well, if you're going to lie to the IRS and you can get away with that, I suppose you can. But the interesting thing about our electronic economy, where all of our money is photons and electrons these days, they're fairly easily tracked. If you try to do an under-the-table economy, you're going to get what you pay for, aren't you? Ayn Rand says basically you can't cheat an honest man. Money is its own value and its own reward. A dishonest man, the money's value will go down. If in your examples person's life if they want to try to skate by and not pay the doctor as much or their college as much or anything else, and they think they're hoarding this out, just like somebody who buried their furs out on the frontier. What are those furs worth? Buried in the ground or hidden?
Nothing.
Not as much or nothing,
You
yeah.
have to take them off when you need them, and then maybe you'll pay that, but you know.
Yes, you can live in the loopholes, that's true. Harry Brown wrote a whole book about that.
Yeah.
But I think that most people would pay what they think they're getting good dollar value for. I don't think most people think they're getting great dollar value for the amount of money we're putting on medical care now.
Well, you know, it's hard. It's not difficult for some people to hide. Maybe not, yeah, if they're making no money, no, that's crazy. But they'll say, okay, I'll tell you, maybe you know, about 3/4 of what I'm making. I'm making, you know, or maybe 2/3 of what I'm making, I'll go public with, and I can hide the rest.
Right. Basically, force and fraud go hand in hand, and if you set up a thing where you say, well, I have an automatic paycheck deposit, and this bill and that bill and that bill get paid automatically, and it's just figured by a computer doing a percentage, tick, tick, whatever it is that month, and it can be different every month. A lot of people have incomes all over the place, you know. But the general trend is with education, it's going to go up. If you have your health, it's going to go up. If you have a nice house, at least over something, you're not worried about your kids staying warm on a grate on the sidewalk, your income's going to go up. Yes?
Getting back to reporting income to the IRS, they did a study on self-employed people who report their own income without any outside W-2s, 1099s, and they found that people will report sufficient income so that their maximum tax is 25% of their actual income. They will cut it down to where they're paying only 25%, which is what they think is fair.
Mm-hmm. And as far as keeping two books and this kind of thing. In your personal life, as opposed to an entrepreneur or an entrepreneuse, is the French word for a female business person, it's harder to do that because not everybody can keep two sets of books. Yeah, you can get paid under the table for doing a job and so forth, but how many jobs that are really worthwhile having are paid that way? Would that create more payment that way? Would it? It could be an outgrowth. But conversely, there would be a response to that, that if you want to deal with us doctors, and we're going to save your butt someday, and we're going to keep you healthy, you got to level with us, you know, value for value. And I think there will be an intrusiveness if you go for a medical card. Well, if you ever got caught cheating on them, well, it might make a notation on there on a little magnetic strip on it.
Or they can go on witch hunts. If they can do that, if they go on witch hunts, they can get somebody who will actually be honest.
So you know what your penalty is?
What?
You get to pay for it as an amortization fixed payment like you do now. In other words, the current system would be the penalty. Think about that for a minute. Can you cheat this? Not as easily. You're probably right. But when you need what they're saying for and the glass is empty, they're not going to help you. And they don't now. They'll take your house, they'll rake your credit on your education loans, or they'll nationalize it, or they'll do something else worse to you as far as making you a slave. So, I mean, they can do that to you. That's what they do now.
There's actually a Christian doctor up in Northern California, and the patient who comes to see him, he employs a service, and you go to speak to the guy at the service, and he determines what your ability to pay is. And the doctor makes an agreement. If you're willing to disclose to the guy at the service, he'll abide by whatever he thinks is a fair rate. And then he delivers treatment.
Exactly that same econometric value. How much is my service really worth to you as a poor person or somebody who's having difficulties or hardships or even, a medical problem?
So the patient has to agree in advance, too, to apply.
Yes. If you pre-think out the economics and the econometrics, you can come up with hard and fast percentages and or numbers if you want. Either way. Fee for service, some people prefer to do that for small, tiny problems. But they want the big comprehensive health care in case they get in a car wreck and they're really smashed up or they get a major disease. Fine. In the free market, pay 7% for that. If you want the other 5% for everything else, great. You want to chance it? Call it a deductible. It's your percentage. You can do savings accounts and other kinds of half-baked sorts of things, but to close the gap. But you know, it would be better just to pay the multiplication problem and say, here, take care of it all on that basis. You had a question?
No.
Okay. I answered all of them? Anybody else have a thought or a question on this? Because if you start talking to people about this, they'll ask these very good questions. And believe me, I've been asked them 100 times in any discussion. It's almost I can't keep up sometimes with the questions asked because it's so alien. Quote Robert Heinlein, it's so new. Yes?
This is kind of an income tax for services that you're picking. It's almost like a free market income tax. Is that what?
Yeah. If you want to think of it as a concept of revenue is taxation or revenue is income. John Chauvin, who's the head of the Stanford Institute of Economic Policy Research, did a big article in the Wall Street Journal last month. He's a guy I'd love to work for up there sometime. He said most calculations only deal with shareholders. Think of stockholder companies. What is a shareholder? They are a tool provider. Here, I'm going to hand you a tool to do a job with. That cost me $1. Now, you're going to hand me a dividend of a nickel every year for the next 20 years. So that means in 20 years, I'm going to get my $1 back as dividends. But in the meanwhile, the value of that $1 as a stock share goes up to $10,000 because of the marvelous work he does with that tool. The Soviet Union has, and what built the Soviet Union, if you really want to be objective about it, was the first commissars after they won the Soviet Revolution. They had about 115 commissars. Many of those were New Yorker Americans, many of whom had a Hebrew background. They paid a tithing to their synagogue, and when the synagogues got burned to the ground, particularly pogroms in Russian places, they'd pay another percentage of 10% to the patriarch of the family. What was that 10% for? It was for birthing babies, sending you to college, getting a trade, human investments. Okay? So, when the communists or the socialists won the revolution there, Marx and Lenin were scratching their heads. You know, Marx had said nothing about what happens if you win. Lenin had no mechanism for running an economy. There was not a thing in communist doctrine about it. So he turned to his fellow revolutionaries and says, how do we make this work? And they said, well, we used to pay 10% to the patriarch of the family. He says, I'm a communist, I'm an atheist, I'm not a religious Jew, don't kill me please. But this is how we did it. And those commissars came up with a first 5-year plan. And you know what it was? No kid, a tithe. 10% goes to the Supreme Soviet. Now think about that for a minute, okay?
And our lowest tax bracket is 10%.
Yeah, it's a tax. If I take in capitalism and I call instead of a use of tools tax of 10% to the Supreme Soviet, I call it a dividend in capitalism, what the heck is the difference? Well, okay, nobody's got a gun to your head, but other than that, you know. But the concept, operationally, revenue-wise, is the same. And John Chauvin pointed out that the stock market, if you include dividends, which never are, payment for the use of tools to a tool provider, a stockholder, people with the guns, they provided the capital for the new tractor on the collective farm. They became state capitalists, and they got paid that way. And you know what? The Soviet Union from 1917 to 1961, when they decided to arm themselves to the teeth with nuclear weapons and everything else, they had a 7% gross domestic product increase almost every year with a minor bobble of World War II, and the Nazis got in the way with their economics. After that, it went down to 1% because they kept throwing it into armaments. It was a third world country trying to be a first world military power, which broke them eventually. And you all have lived through that with me. Think about the brilliance that the only thing with the stupid quota systems where you'd make 10,000 left shoes and no right shoes in the Soviet Union, and the ridiculous control of people, tyranny has its own externality factors the economists talk about. All the socialists want to do is they want to include everybody. They want to control everybody. The capitalists say, everybody do your own thing, but let's trade, let's kiss, let's shake hands, let's make deals. How you make those deals, there are some natural law principles that work. If you want to patent a word like liberty or something, throw a nickel in there for Thomas Paine, that's okay. But if you're going to think about how you would like the world to run, that's not a bad model, either Wall Street or what there was in the Soviet Union minus all the rest of their ridiculous tyranny. It actually worked for them. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, Mike, we were talking just earlier, that he was in Berlin, and they were talking with his coworker about title companies. Hernandez Soto says in his book, The Mystery of Capitalism, if I give you a piece of property title to some land, and it says, this land is mine, there's title deed. You're the American Land Title Association, and now you're going to go start the International Land Title Association, because there isn't one. And capitalism needs to advance in the former Soviet bloc, and in Africa, and South America, and in fascist communist China. It needs this badly. We have peace in America because we have these pieces of property title. The only difference that I'm saying tonight is you pay for your land or your house or your education, not to an education Soviet, but to whatever college you want to go to. Or the capitalists in a career future exchange, you say, I'm going to pay you a percentage.
Cooperation rather than coercion, exactly.
Bingo. That's the whole idea. Now, if you think about what the implications for you in this personally are, I've gone to the American Land Title Association in the 1980s, and I went back to them in the 1990s, and you know what they did this last month? They started an international outreach committee. Join it. Be on it. Take over the world. Unconquer the world. There's a libertarian slogan. How you like that? Karl Hess would love it. Unconquer the world. Kind of like the Uncola, you know. So that's, I think you focused right on, like a laser beam, right on one of the most important things, like he did, Mr. Fine did, on this idea of how do you try to skate out of a system, how the freeloaders and so forth. This is the thing that you got to deal with. How did the Soviet Union deal with it? Well, you know that.
Wait a minute.
Didn't work too well.
If you have a certain amount of income, that's what you have to offer. So when you go and get other things, they're going to look at your income and they're going to go, well, I don't know if I want to.
It's very discoverable, isn't it? Yeah, what you decide to buy your furniture with, the amount of information that's out there freely, and you give permission for, too, to people to do business with you.
They have to decide whether you're worth investing in.
And if you...
That's what stops it.
Are you worth investing in for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years?
Yeah.
For the next 1,000 years, 10,000 years? Stanford thinks so. The kids up there do. Okay? If you're a Heinlein fan and you want to be Lazarus Long and the rest of the crowd, great. You now have a way to pay for it. And when you're down and out, or you got hurt or sick or whatever, you can still get your booster shots.
And this also addresses the problem of the 1984 George Orwell surveillance society, because the only thing wrong with losing privacy is losing it to the state,
Right.
who has no vested interest in your success. If you lose your privacy to the market, they have all of the invested interest in you being successful. It's exactly
and accurate.
the opposite.
Exactly. And if I want to fight crime and coercion, I go click. I had students getting off a bus. The gang students were doing their hazing in October, right during the first quarter algebra tests, you know? I was teaching algebra. I said, how many of you got cell phones? 45% of the kids, I mean, with cameras. They raised their hands. They didn't raise the cell phones because I was supposed to be taking them away. Not that I ever did. And I say, next time they try to hassle these 9th graders and you 10th graders, take pictures of them and send them to their parents.
You too.
The next 2 days, these hoods were getting their cars taken away, their phones confiscated, all kinds of keys taken away. They were grounded. You can't be going out and beating up on little kids like that. I didn't raise you that way, says Mamacita. No way. And again, the bad guys can't hide from the light. And yeah, they'll be found out. And you can try to Harry Brown out, but it's not going to work that effectively.
Well, a few musicians, they do that very well. They make the corporate money, or they work for private organizations, but if they do like private parties at a house, that's free money.
And if you go to the Musicians Federation Hall so that your name is there with all of the other musicians to play for that wedding, then there's a decision to be made. How much am I going to get paid through the Union Hall or the Federation Hall? See, there's always somebody there as a middleman that's going to foul that strategy up if you want to get the wedding dates all the time as a musician. There's a variety of hope that, yeah, there's people that'll just be in a cash society and that's okay. But don't expect others then to just accept your word.
Well, I think about all their income at the end of the day is only a certain amount.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
they
There will always be.
Okay, just hit the line to where you're not going to do an investigation.
When you go to an emergency room right now, what are you paying for? You're paying for 5 other people who are there that have no medical insurance. My mother worked in the Angels Hospital as a collector, a tax lien collector for people who had no money, but they were land rich when they needed medical care. Thousands of dollars of medical care, early 1960s. Per month, she was responsible for when houses were sold for liens for medical care against them. Mind you, this is in 1960 dollars, $11 million a month. Think about that. That's what people's real value is worth. And if you're paying for your house in a percentage and you're getting your medical care and your college education in percentage, there's not too many other things except maybe crop insurance you'd really want to do it on. Yeah, we can get Detroit going. Is it in your self-interest to do that? There, you can modify it. Okay, this other principle is continuum of contact. Is it easy for you to write me out a check that says, here's 12% of my income, which is 0, and multiplied by 0.12 is 0? Is that hard for you to do, to keep in contact with me? Say, hey, I didn't have anything this month? There's no reason for you to run and hide. I don't have to pay him to skip trace you and track you down and hit you with dun letters and try to attach property. That's costly administratively and bureaucratically. If you just communicate with me and I say, well, what can I do to help you? You need some education. I got some friends who do that same way. You need a car to get to work. Great. Oh, the social services won't take your kids away because you can't get to work and you're a mechanic. Okay, let's do that. Let's get you a clunker you can fix up. Whatever the solution is, it can be done. For the most desperate people among us and for the most dishonest people among us, without coercion and information, yeah, it pushes everything towards handshakes. Thank you very much.